Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. The garage door slid up on my electronic command. I blinked in surprise. I had nowhere to park in my own garage. My wife's silver BMW was parked in her place on the left, but a shiny red F-150 pickup truck was parked in my place on the right. Well. I've wondered before if my wife is faithful to Bev. I think I have the answer now. I recognized the truck belonging to Ted. He and his wife Charlie moved into a new house about a mile away a year and a half ago or so. Ted is a junior partner at the law firm of Bev's parents and has been working with them for about 8 years. Last week, he showed off his new truck to a few of us at a party at Bev's parents' house. It's deer season, and almost every male in town packs up and goes to deer camp for the entire 2-week season. It's been a tradition in this part of the South for as long as they can remember. Some wives and daughters also go, but this is mostly a men's event, something like friends' father's sons. My wife is a girly girl, and she doesn't have the slightest interest in doing this in the woods at night, let alone for 2 weeks. I belong to a hunting club east of town with work buddies, and Ted belongs to a club west of town with a bunch of lawyers, a treacherous crowd that I'm happy to avoid. The season starts tomorrow morning, and today at noon I went to the hunting camp to get ready. Bev expects me to be gone for 2 whole weeks, just like every other man in town. Charlie no doubt expects Ted to stay at his camp for 2 weeks too, so Bev just opens the garage door. Ted pulls in before dawn or after dusk. Bev closes the door, and voila, you have the perfect setting for a long secret date. The offended spouses have no idea about the heated affair taking place behind closed doors. Today, at about 6 o'clock, I felt unwell. I decided to make a 2-hour trip home in case something happens to me. I would rather recover from the flu or something like that in the comfort of home under the supervision of my devoted wife, rather than endure it in the woods alone. That's the only reason I was here at 8 o'clock in the evening to discover this clever little love nest. When I returned to civilization, I picked up some medicine at the pharmacy, and now I felt a little better. At least that was the case before my discovery. I guess I'm not surprised by Bev's infidelity. She's self-absorbed, just like her mother. She is gorgeous and flirtatious. Men desire her, and she has the opportunity to go astray, given my frequent trips. It is enough to give her husband a pause. There's no point in being indignant or worried. Adultery between spouses is a long-standing story. They didn't put a warning about adultery in the 10 Commandments 2,500 years ago because it was a new concept. And adultery is not exclusive to both sexes. After all, it takes one of them for a romance to work properly. Maybe it would be fun to come in, pick up Ted and make a scene, but in the end it won't do anything useful. Now I have accurate information about my wife's infidelity. The question is, what is the best way to use this to my advantage? I turn off the truck's headlights, close the garage door, and slip away. The house is on a 3-acre lot at the end of a cul-de-sac. The big neighbor's lake is behind the house with a swampy stream coming out of the lake dam and running in a ravine along the far side of my house and then swinging on the other side of the street in front of the house. This leaves my house quite isolated. The garage is located at the far end of the house by the ravine. It is unlikely that adulterous lovers or any curious neighbors noticed my arrival or departure. Although I belong to a hunting camp, I also enjoy my solitude. I bought a 5-acre plot of land adjacent to the camp. My plot includes a pond and a small 2-bedroom farmhouse where I live. I'm hunting on the land rented by the club, and maybe I'll go up to the main area of the club to shoot with the guys and maybe have a beer. But overall, I'm enjoying my secluded time at the farmhouse for my 2-week escape from the world. In the summer, Bev and some of her friends go for a swim in the pond and sunbathe. I get involved in making cocktails for bathing beauties and frying fish for lunch. This is a pleasant duty, as there is quite a lot of naked female charm basking in the sun. Given the remoteness of the pond, girls sometimes become quite bold in exposing themselves to the sun's rays of Helios, which, of course, I don't mind. Well, I have a 2-hour drive back to the hunting camp and the farm tonight to think about my predicament and plan my course of action. Chapter 1. My predicament. In high school, I was an excellent student and a good baseball player. My family has a long military tradition, and I wanted to enroll in one of the U.S. military academies, VMI or Citadel. But Dad was very ill, so I accepted a baseball scholarship to the state university, which was only 50 miles from home. While I was an outstanding player in high school and American Legion baseball, college was a big step forward. I was playing, but I was just a reliable, very reliable player, not a star. It probably didn't help that I was an engineer with a heavy workload. I went as far as I was going with baseball, but I succeeded more in my studies. It was the Vietnam era, so I planned to contribute and joined an army company. Chapter 2. Preparing for Revenge. The next morning, I returned to the city first thing. The bank was open on Saturday morning, so I transferred all our money to new accounts. I canceled the credit cards that were in Bev's name and transferred all the mutual funds to new accounts. This took care of what I could do on the financial end of the approaching storm. I figured Bev would be busy with her lover, not figuring out what I'd done. Then I went to see a lawyer I met playing softball in the church league. He was also a Vietnam veteran and was happy to help. He gave me a brief briefing over a couple of cups of coffee at home. If it wasn't for adultery, I would have paid dearly for my freedom in this state. He also warned me that Bev's parents would be tough opponents in the fight for a divorce. He explained that her parents were both tough legal geniuses. I made an appointment for 8 o'clock on Monday at my friend's office to start the official battle. My next stop was the library, where I read a little about the state's divorce laws and the requirements for proof of adultery. Based on this research and what my lawyer friend told me, in fact, I have to prove Bev's propensity and ability to commit adultery. I don't have to have a picture of them at the crime scene, although it will certainly be the icing on the cake. However, now that I know about adultery, I also have to be careful not to do anything that Bev could claim condoned adultery. Therefore, going home and pretending that everything was fine was not the most sensible option. I realized that it is better to act now than later. I went into Bo's Army-Navy store. Bo was a veteran of the Korean War and collected all kinds of military items. His shop was a veritable museum of military artifacts. In the back room, he kept a lot of neat military toys, which the authorities disapproved of civilians. But for Bo, they were treasures. I bought a few things and spent the obligatory hour drinking coffee with Bo and exchanging stories about the war. Finally, I stopped by to see Jen, the wife of my best friend in town. Her husband George and I played baseball together in college, and eventually we both started working in the lab. I kicked George out of the room to talk to Jen alone. With some effort, I convinced her to make 2 short recordings for me on my tape recorder. She is an intelligent girl, quickly found out the circumstances of my request and asked very insightful questions. I referred to the fact that I expected her to help, blaming her for our long-standing friendship, swore to keep a secret, and promised to explain everything in a few days. I missed lunch and was starving, so I had a bite to eat at Applebee's and thought about my plan for the evening. I'd love to have a drink, but I'd rather have coffee to keep my head clear. Chapter 3. Taking a Stand. I headed and arrived at the edge of the forest on the opposite shore of the lake from my house a little after 4:30. When the sun set, I carefully descended into the ravine in the gathering dusk, crossed the stream and slipped into the forest along the shore of the lake. I emptied my bladder in the ravine forest, as there is nothing worse than lying in ambush or at an observation post and wanting a little. I settled down in a thicket of red buckeye at the edge of our yard, about 50 feet from the house. I was wearing hunting camouflage, the usual local men's clothing at this time of year, and I was well hidden in the dark. I had binoculars and I could see the kitchen window and the back porch well, but nothing else. Around 5:30, Bev appeared in the kitchen and began to tinker with dinner. Ted showed up a few minutes later with drinks for them. It looks like a martini with a couple of olives was a favorite drink tonight. They talked animatedly for a few minutes and then Ted left and reappeared on the porch. He lit my grill and returned to the kitchen to give my wife a little kiss. Having a little fun, she chased him away with a plate of steaks. Ted returned with the steaks cooked, and they joked and teased each other cheerfully and animatedly as they set out the plates. All in all, it was a very pleasant Rockwell scene. The only problem was that it was my wife and my house. But the other man was enjoying both of them. The mischievous couple disappeared from the kitchen, no doubt to enjoy their steaks in the dining room. I slipped through the back door into the utility room, using my key to unlock the door. Bev keeps the sliding door to the kitchen closed, as the utility room is always too untidy to be in public view. I opened the door a crack. I heard Bev and Ted talking, and it seemed to me that they were enjoying a romantic candlelit dinner in the dining room. I continued on to the garage, where I flattened the right tires of Ted's truck. I have an electric air pump under my workbench. I took off the pump hose and put it in my backpack. Even if Ted had thought to look for my pump, it would have been useless right now. His truck was temporarily stuck outside my house, and his independent mobility was limited by his legs. Then I checked the phone in the garage and it worked. We have a pantry that has doors to the utility room adjacent to the kitchen and to the dining room where Bev and Ted enjoyed dinner. I slipped into the pantry from the utility room and sat down next to the door to the dining room. I could hear the adulterers talking as clearly as if I were sitting at the same table with them. Ted said, "You have chosen excellent steaks. I love this wine too." I didn't know John knew about wines. I always thought of him as a jock drinking beer. Bev laughed. "Oh, you underestimate John. After we got married, he found out that I loved wine and became a real connoisseur to please me. Don't kid yourself, this boy is smart Cracker Jack. Yesterday I heard a girl's gossip at the club that he would be sent back to the graduate school of the laboratory next year. He doesn't know it yet. Sometimes John can be clueless." Well, at least that's good news, I thought. "Where do you think he's going?" Ted asked. "I suspect it's the University of Texas again. There's a professor there that he really likes, and they keep in touch," my wife replied. "Will you go with him?" "To Austin? Do I look like a shepherdess? It's just a year for coursework, and then for a dissertation defense in the lab. I'm going to stay here and run the house like a good little housewife," Bev laughed. "It can be a very exciting year for you without a permanent husband. Does he suspect that you're cheating on him?" "John? No, he's just a simple country boy. I make sure that he is fully entertained in bed, and he is absorbed in his work, which goes beyond anything I understand. Between his workload and traveling, I can easily pamper myself when I want male diversity in my life." "I'm looking forward to next year," Ted blurted out unctuously. "But I won't be alone, will I?" My wife laughed. "Of course not, Ted. I like the buffet, not the diet." "That's probably true," Ted said cheerfully. Bev laughed even louder. "Oh my God, do you remember that time when my parents came home early and found us on the couch?" Ted regretfully joined in the laughter. "Will I ever forget? I only worked for your parents for about a year back then. As far as I remember, your husband only went to Vietnam a week ago. I was sure that I was about to be fired if I wasn't shot." "Oh, it would have been, but Mom intervened and saved your skin." I knew that some kind of miracle had happened. "Pour me some more wine," Bev continued, "and I'll tell you the rest of the story." A minute later, my giggling wife continued her story. "The next day, my mother took me to lunch at the club. There she gave me a diploma course on adultery. She pointed out my mistakes that got us caught, explained the laws regarding adultery, stressed that caution and careful planning are necessary to avoid detection, and told me a bunch of methods and good places for secret trysts." "You've got to be kidding," Ted exclaimed. "No. It turns out that Mom cheated on Dad even before they got married, and it all came down to science. She said her mother was the same. I can't believe it's Grandma. She always seemed like such an unapproachable and strict old lady. It's hard to imagine how she lifts her skirts in front of every man she likes. Anyway, it looks like I'm the latest in a long family line of serial infidelities. I think the women in my family just love variety and enjoy taking risks and mischief. This is a real family legacy." I could hear the amusement in Bev's voice when she asked, "Okay, Ted, I have to ask. Have you ever made love to my mom?" Do I really have to answer this question?" Bev laughed. "I certainly learned a lot about my wife tonight. I had no idea." Bev continued her interrogation. "So what about your wife? Does Charlie suspect something? You know that she and I went to high school and college together and even lived together for a while. She's a smart girl, much smarter than you. I was always surprised that she married you." Ted replied grimly, It's been a little tense at home lately. Yes, Charlie is suspicious, but I'm careful and not as active as you are." Ted continued, "I think that the future of my marriage with Charlie does not promise anything good, but I have to be smart about how to get out of this with intact skin in this condition. I met Ted's wife, Charlene more precisely, several times at parties and at the club. She was attractive and, as Bev said, very smart. Often the intelligence of a beautiful woman is overlooked because of her appearance. But if you talk to Charlie, it will immediately become clear that she is a very smart girl. I've always enjoyed her company. What about you? Are you going to stay with John?" "Oh my God, yes," Bev replied. "He's just what I need in a husband. I really love him, I'm just not faithful to him. We're talking about eventually having children. He is the perfect genetic material for this and would be a great father." "No, he's a keeper." Ted noticed. "Bev, you like the best things in life. I always imagined that you would marry a rich man, not a government research engineer. You need someone who will support you in the style you are used to." Well, John's doing pretty well as it is. Mom and Dad are rich and give me money. They've always been good about pampering their only daughter. In addition, there is a trust fund of my grandparents, which they left to me. All this together makes up a good financial package. I always suspected that my relatives gave Bev money, but the trust fund is news. Bev changed the subject. All this talk about adultery excites me. The wine and steaks were gone. I'll take the plates to the kitchen. Pour us some cognac. Damn, I wish they would stop drinking my good drinks. I heard Bev scrape the plates into the trash and put them in the sink as she slipped back into the back room. Ted reappeared in the dining room with 2 glasses of my cognac, and he and his wife enjoyed a long, searching kiss while I watched them through the half-open door. Ted's hands took liberties with my wife's body, but she didn't seem to mind. When they broke off the kiss to take a breath, Bev exhaled. "Let's go to the office and finish our cognac." They left, out of sight in the direction of the lair. Soon, a cacophony of laughter and joyful squeals came from our bedroom. The adulterous lovers worked hard, enjoying each other. Chapter 4. Execution of Revenge. Now it was the X hour, and it was time to move. I went into the garage and made my first phone call. The phone rang twice, and then Charlie appeared on the line. "Hello?" I played Jen's first recording on my phone. "Hi, Charlie, this is your friend. Ted is having an affair with Bev. You'll find them both in her house now." "What?" Charlie stammered. I hung up the phone and called the fire department control room. The first call was answered, and I turned on Jen's second recording. "Go quickly. The house at 8 Magnolia Drive is on fire. Smoke is pouring out of it, and people are inside." I hung up the phone as soon as the recording ended. I needed to act quickly. I probably had no more than 5 or 6 minutes before the fireman and Charlie showed up at the front door. I turned on the tactical red flashlight I bought at Bo's store. I grabbed a metal trash can from the garage and put it in the kitchen. Then I hurried to the front door, turned on the front porch and the garage exterior lights, and ran back to the office. In a moment of inspiration, I grabbed my wife and Ted's scattered clothes and threw them into the utility room. I pulled a gas mask from my backpack, also from Bo, and put it on. Damn, this military training doesn't leave you. Then I pulled out 2 smoke grenades and a canister of CS tear gas and threw them into a metal trash can. The tear gas was from Bo's unofficial and illegal stash of military toys. Having finished my business, I retired to the back room and waited. Out of petty spite, I pulled Ted's driver's license and credit cards out of his wallet and put them in my pocket. I would destroy them later, just to hurt Ted that he was left without them and had to replace them. Smoke grenades and a tear gas canister hissed and released a dense cloud of smoke and tear gas, quickly filling the kitchen, and then the cloud poured into the adjacent dining room and office. Military tear gas is actually an aerosol dispersion of fine powder, not a real gas. Despite this subtle difference, the smoke alarm in the kitchen began to roar, and the one at the entrance to the hall leading to the bedrooms quickly followed suit. The screeching of the alarm caused my wife and Ted to exclaim in surprise. I heard them rushing down the hall from the bedroom. My wife screamed, "There's something burning in the kitchen." They made it to the kitchen door before tear gas rained down on them. At one point, they were fine and rushed forward to put out the fire. The next moment, they doubled over, gasping and coughing, and screamed in pain, rubbing their eyes, increasing the burning sensation. The snot flowed freely. Tear gas is a vile and merciless enemy. Ted shouted, "The smoke is poisonous, get out, get out." He gallantly pushed my wife towards the front door. "I'll take our clothes." During the Vietnam-era conscription, Ted had some kind of fictitious release, so he never served in the army. Consequently, he did not recognize the effects of tear gas, as any military veteran would have done. I could hear Ted struggling in the smoke-filled den, trying in vain to find their clothes, which were now stacked in the back room next to me. After a few seconds, the tear gas turned out to be too strong, and he followed my wife to the front door. I heard the sirens of the fire department in the distance and hurried into the office. I quickly scattered my wife's and Ted's clothes around the room again. I threw my wife's panties to hang them on top of the ceiling chandelier for a good view. You'll need a ladder to pull off Bev's panties. The first lights of the fire truck were flashing in the front window, so it was time for me to leave. I ran back to the kitchen, put on insulated gloves, and grabbed a metal trash can with tear gas canisters. I went out the back door of the utility room, locked it behind me, and ran into the woods. Driving past the lake, I stopped to throw the still smoking smoke grenades and tear gas canister as far into the lake as possible, and then ran back to my truck. It was only 8 o'clock. Then I drove back to the hunting camp, throwing the metal trash can into a dumpster on the way out of town. Chapter 5. The Finale of Revenge. Unfortunately, I could not be in front of my house to observe the results of my machinations. Therefore, later, others present gave me the following. I could only enjoy the events indirectly. Firefighters and Charlie Ted arrived at the same time, followed by a growing crowd of curious neighbors attracted by sirens and lights. Tear gas smoke was pouring out of the open front door. The outdoor lighting I turned on illuminated a bizarre scene. My wife was on all fours, throwing up. Ted was leaning over her, hands on his knees, breathing deeply. Both were naked as newborns. Charlie walked over to Ted, who straightened up at her approach. Charlie stood over him and launched into a torrent of abuse that no one expected to hear from such a level-headed Southern lady like her. The firefighter grabbed Charlie and pulled her away from Bev and Ted, who were still choking, coughing, and crying. Charlie continued to verbally flay Ted from a distance. A deputy sheriff has arrived to take charge of keeping Charlie and Ted apart. One group of firefighters made their way to the front door in search of the source of the smoke. Another team went around the back of the house and broke open the back door of the utility room to approach the fire from the other side. Due to the thick smoke, the firefighters were wearing breathing apparatus, so they did not know that the smoke cloud contained tear gas. A second fire truck and 2 more sheriff's department vehicles arrived. My neighbors kept their eyes open. Somewhere along the way, some good Samaritan brought Bev and Ted blankets to cover their public nudity. By pure chance, there was a film crew on local television filming the aftermath of a highway accident about 2 miles from my house. They were just finishing up when they heard that the fire department and the police were calling on the scanner about a fire in my house. They rushed straight to me to join the party in my front yard. There were probably about 50 neighbors standing around and gawking. There was a great episode on the morning news on TV the next day, showing the crowd watching the smoke rising from the house as the firefighter came and went. The best part was that they showed a picture of my wife and Ted wrapped in blankets and staring blankly at the smoking house. Finally, one of the firefighters came out and told the commander of the scene, "There is no fire. There's a lot of very acrid smoke, but we can't find any fire. Jim Bob is checking the attic right now, but we don't see anything burned." The commander of the scene suggested that Ted and Bev not stay in the house until it was thoroughly checked for problems with electricity or gas. Bev said, "I'm going to my parents." Ignoring our neighbors and their offers of help, Bev entered the house, quickly dressed in the bedroom, and drove away in her BMW. Ted nodded and said, "I think I'll go to the Holiday Inn." The sheriff added dryly, "That's probably wise." Ted was slower than Bev as he had to pick up the scattered clothes. When he tried to get his truck out of the garage, he found out about 2 flat tires. His truck was stuck half in the garage, half out of it. One of the neighbors finally took pity on him and gave him a ride to the Holiday Inn. There he discovered that he had no credit cards and only $25 in cash. He called Bev, who gave the Holiday Inn clerk her credit card over the phone, only to find out that her credit card had been canceled. Bev's father finally had to step in and give his personal card over the phone before Ted could get a room for the night. My wife and her lover were very unhappy people. Chapter 6. The next morning, I went straight back to the hunting camp and went to bed. The next morning I got up before dawn and went out to a remote deer pasture. It took me a while to hide the gas mask, flashlight, and gloves deep in the forest. After that, I did nothing and did not return to the farm until almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And sure enough, there was a stranger sitting on my porch. He was a thin, elderly man with graying hair. When I approached, the stranger said, "Hi, you must be John." "Yes," I replied. "John, my name is Jimmy. I'm investigating arson in the fire department." I looked at him questioningly. "A strange thing happened in your house last night. There was a fire." I interrupted him, pretending to be worried. "Was Bev hurt? How serious is the damage?" No, it's all right. The funny thing about this fire is, there was a lot of smoke, but even looking this morning in daylight, we can't find any signs of a fire." "Smoke, but no fire? I'm not sure I understand," I replied, trying to sound embarrassed. Jimmy sighed. "Me too. I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen anything like it." I just stood there and looked appropriately puzzled. "I mentioned that your wife and neighbor Ted were knocked down by the smoke. It broke out right in front of the whole neighborhood, firefighters, the sheriff's department, and television reporters, not to mention Ted's wife." I shook my head. "No, you didn't mention that," I said, suppressing a grin. "You don't seem surprised that your wife is flirting with your neighbor." It was my turn to sigh. Well, if you've seen my wife naked, you know she's a beautiful creature. Any husband with such a wife knows that there is always a chance that she will have a flirt when he turns away. It's sad, but a fact of life. Jimmy nodded. Yes, it's true. As they say in that old song, something like, if you want to be happy for the rest of your life, never make a beautiful woman your wife. There seems to be some wisdom in this. I agreed. Funny thing about your wife and Ted's symptoms. Of course, it looks like they got hit by some kind of tear gas. Firefighters said the smoke was quite strong. Tear gas, yeah. It seems unlikely. Yes, it is illegal to have it in this state unless you are a policeman or a military man. I didn't say anything. You know, only you and Ted's wife Charlie have the incentive to do something like smoke two naked adulterous couples for all to see with tear gas. Quite an interesting plan. I answered slowly. Well, I've been at the hunting camp since Friday afternoon. Jimmy ignored my offered alibi and continued. I talked to Charlie this morning before I came here. Well, this girl is a firecracker, isn't she? Yes, of course, I agreed. Charlie says she doubted her husband's loyalty, but she didn't know anything definite. She says that a woman called her and said that her husband was at your house with your wife. A young woman in her 20s or so, southern accent, good diction, probably well-educated. But Charlie didn't recognize the voice. This call was just before the so-called fire. This allowed Charlie and the rest of your neighbors to arrive just as your wife ran out of the house. Jimmy was waiting for me to say something. Well, if Ted, or for that matter, your wife had been shot, then Charlie would have been at the top of the list of suspects as a criminal. Jimmy pursed his lips thoughtfully. But this operation was smooth, carefully planned to the smallest detail and executed precisely. Charlie is not that kind of woman. She's not the kind of girl who spends time maneuvering to stab you in the back. Yes, I can see that, I agreed. But you're a smart guy, a military man, an effective combat leader, an engineer. On the other hand, you are exactly the kind of person who knows how to do it, how to plan it and then really implement it. I shrugged my shoulders. What can I say? I was there in the camp hunting. Jimmy smiled wearily. Oh yes, your alibi. I stopped by the main camp before I visited you. The gossip in this county is incredible. They all knew everything about the whole case. They all swear they saw you at the camp all weekend. In fact, Henry swears that around 8 o'clock last night he was sure that the two of you were drinking beer. Just at 8 o'clock, the so-called fire started. Jimmy sighed heavily. John, you have good friends and they really like you. But please tell them for me that they're not lying a damn thing. He continued. It's interesting that the fire department dispatcher who received the call about the fire in your house said that they also received a call from a woman. Their description of the woman sounded exactly like Charlie's caller. In both cases, the woman made her speech without asking questions and hung up the phone. You could almost think they were recordings. Jimmy watched me for a minute and then continued his monologue. You know, I can do some tests, and I'm sure I'll find remnants of tear gas in your house. I can fill out a bunch of paperwork and find out what number Charlie and the fire department called last night. It might be interesting. This morning, I found a man's footprints by the lake behind your house. About your size, I'd say. I suspect that if I fill the lake with divers, I will find several tear gas canisters. I bet if I go around the Army and Navy surplus stores, I can find records of interesting recent purchases. Not tear gas, of course, since it's illegal, but maybe things like a gas mask would be useful for that. Damn, this Jimmy is no fool, I thought to myself. I'm a fan of dealing with a grandmaster. Jimmy stood up and stretched. But money is tight these days. I have a whole bunch of shitty cases to investigate. There was no property damage, no one was injured. In any case, this is your property. It would take a whole month of government lawyers working on Sundays just to figure out what crime, if any, was committed. I don't think there's much point in spending money and time on this. Jimmy took a deep breath. But I just wouldn't want anyone to think they got away with something when they didn't. Well, I have a long trip to the city ahead of me, so it's better to go, I shouted as Jimmy headed to his car. Thanks, Jimmy. Message received 5 out of 5. Jimmy turned around and smiled, recognizing the old military terminology of the radio. It was a good plan, Captain. Mission accomplished. Now don't waste any more time on her. Go on with your life. Jimmy got into the car and drove back to the city. Chapter 7. The Epilogue. I quickly packed up my things and headed back to my house. This year, the hunting season is over for me. I stopped by to explain to George and Jen that I promised her for making notes for me. They saw a video on TV about a fire, which, as it turned out, was not a fire. They recognized Bev, but not Ted, and easily connected the obvious two and two. It took some time to satisfy Jen's curiosity and thirst for every detail. George just sat there shaking his head and laughing from time to time. I thanked Jen again for her help and went home, not feeling happy about having to deal with Bev soon. When I got home, I found that Ted had somehow taken his truck, and the message light was flashing on the phone. Bev called about every hour, starting at 7 in the morning. Basically, the messages were like, "John, I'm at my parents' house. Call me as soon as you get this message." As the day went on, she became more and more annoyed, and expressions like, "Damn, John, where are you? We need to talk, and please talk to me before you do anything," began to be added to the recorded messages. I really didn't want to deal with Bev right now, so I ignored the messages. I skipped lunch again and was looking in the fridge, considering making a sandwich, when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw Charlie standing there with a wry smile. Charlie is usually a very collected and cheerful lady. Today, she just looked tired and exhausted. She said, "Hello, John. Now I suppose you already know everything about last night?" "Yes," I replied. "Okay, then I won't have to explain it again." She smiled, which made her look more like herself. "We're in the same boat, you and me. Invite me in and offer me a drink. We have a lot to talk about." "Come in, Charlie. What would you like to drink?" Somehow Charlie's audacious self, a pointed invitation, brought me out of my gloom. "How about a glass of wine?" she replied. "White or red? I have an Italian Pinot Grigio or an Oregon Pinot Noir." "How about Pinot Grigio?" "Take a seat in the study, I'll bring you some wine." I heard giggling from the office. When I joined her with the wine, I found Charlie smiling at Bev's panties still hanging on the chandelier. The rest of Bev's clothes from last night were still scattered on the floor. "Is this from Bev?" She giggled, pointing at the panties. I nodded. Charlie laughed, took the wine, and sat down. "Are you going to leave them there? Something like a permanent decoration, trophy, or something like that?" Then she added more sadly, "Perhaps at the moment it's more like a monk wearing a shirt made of hair for self-flagellation." Charlie sighed, and her temporary good mood disappeared. "How long have you known about them?" "Since Friday night, when I returned early from hunting camp and found Ted's pickup truck in the garage. Did you know or suspect anything?" Charlie shook her head sadly. "Well, at least you're only 24 hours ahead of me in the learning process. I suspected Ted of cheating about a year after we got married, but I never had any real evidence, or even enough to do much more than make me wonder if I'm being paranoid. Obviously, my instincts were right." "I'm afraid so," I added. "You know, Bev and I have been close friends since high school. I just can't believe that she, of all people, could use my husband." Charlie was silent for a minute and then continued with a cynical laugh. "Actually, I think I shouldn't be surprised. How much do you know about your wife and her infidelity?" "I've learned something since Friday, but I probably only know the tip of the iceberg." Charlie smiled sadly. "Well, Bev has always been a liar, even in high school and college. She cheated on her pilot husband even when he was fighting in Vietnam, and she cheated on you, probably every time you left town. I think Bev gets turned on by the danger and the thrill of it, flaunting conventions, eating forbidden fruit, or something like that. She can't seem to help herself." Charlie turned and looked right at me. "Are you going to take her back?" "No, I have an appointment with my lawyer at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." Charlie breathed a sigh of relief. "Good. One of the reasons I came to talk to you was to tell you that she wouldn't change. You deserve the best from your wife. You nailed her for adultery without hesitation. She's a great woman and can trick men around her finger." Charlie wagged her finger at me for emphasis. "But don't you dare take her back." I smiled at my lecturing neighbor. "I won't. Trust me. What about you, Charlie? Are you taking Ted back?" "No way. I would have castrated him if I could get away with it." I smiled, remembering what Jimmy had said earlier in camp about Charlie's ferocity. "Would you like to come with me tomorrow morning and meet with my lawyer? We have, in fact, the same case. It probably makes sense to use the same lawyer." Charlie smiled. "You're running faster than me. Yes, I would love to go with you. Let's get this thing going." "I'll pick you up tomorrow morning at 7:30, I offered. "The meeting is scheduled for 8. "Agreed." There was a pause and Charlie changed the subject. "John, the whole thing on Saturday night was weird. The arson investigator talked to me. I think his name was Jimmy or something. Saturday night wasn't an accident, was it? Were you behind all this? I thought about it for a minute. There was no longer any legal threat from Jimmy. Charlie was now an ally in the upcoming divorce wars. Why not? Therefore, I described in detail the events that caused bursts of laughter in places. It was nice to share this story with someone. There's nothing funny about having a complicated operation and not being able to brag about it afterwards. Bragging in front of an admiring pretty woman is much better. It was a cathartic experience, and we struck up a new friendship by sharing our sorrows. We also drank a whole bottle of wine, which probably didn't hurt either. The phone rang. Bev, no doubt, I said with a grimace. Charlie replied, "She won't stop. You might as well deal with her now as later." I picked up the phone and put it on speaker so my new divorce ally could hear. I said neutrally, "Hi. John, I've been trying desperately to find you. I'll be right there. We need to talk, honey." "Bev, we have nothing to talk about. Don't come to me." "Look, John, I can explain. I have a lot to answer for, dear, but..." "Bev, you're a liar. Why continue this farce? We're done." Charlie gave me a thumbs up. "Listen, John, please, I know you're crazy," Bev cooed in a soothing voice. "And you have every right to be angry. I'll make it up to you. Let me come and explain everything. We'll go for a consultation. We can make it work." "No, I'm meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. We're done. You go your way and I'll go mine. No recriminations." Another thumb from Charlie. Since pleading and pleading didn't work, Bev shifted gears as smoothly as a Porsche pulling into oncoming traffic. She went on the attack. "Okay, you pathetic dad will represent me. He's the best lawyer in the state. He's going to rip your lawyer's ass off." I replied calmly, "Your father is a very good lawyer. However, does he know about your mom's long history of adultery? Like your mom and Ted?" There was dead silence in the receiver, probably for 30 seconds. "You bugged our house," she screamed. "No, I didn't bug the house. I couldn't find out any other way." Now it dawned on her. "Sorry, Peeping Tom. You were in the house and eavesdropping on us. You set this up." "Damn you," I replied calmly. "No, Bev, you humiliated yourself in front of the whole city. I heard you and Ted even got on the morning TV news." The struggle came out of her. I held the winning hand and didn't blink. She said, "Have your lawyer contact Dad. At least we can behave in a civilized manner." Then she hung up the phone. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Better, much better. Thanks for talking to me." I walked Charlie to the door and opened it for her. She turned around, stood on tiptoe and kissed me. Slowly and more intimately at first when I returned her kiss. Finally, she broke off the kiss and said, "Phew, I've wanted to do this since I first met you. Do you want to come over for dinner tomorrow night?" "Of course," I replied. "How many times do you think they made love to each other?" Charlie asked. "I really don't know. I think it's a lot, based on the way they talked." "Well then, I think we'd better start scoring points tomorrow night. Come ready to work for dinner." With that, Charlie headed for her car with that cheeky grace that only women are capable of.